Welcome, seekers and visionaries, to Oracle Mountain Chats. Here on this sacred virtual peak, we gather, a space for oracles to share their wisdom, their visions, and their craft. It all began with a calling I could not ignore. One day, within a vision, I held this conch shell in my hands, and as I blew its resonant note into the world, I felt its vibration ripple across unseen realms. It was a summons, a signal to fellow oracles scattered near and far. I saw that we were on a mountain, vast and towering, reaching into the heavens. At its base, the world buzzed with life, people moving, creating, searching. Yet at the summit, there was stillness, clarity, and a circle of light. There, oracles stood, their gaze focused both outward and inward. They spoke of the energies they felt, the shifts they saw, and the whispers of the unseen. They weren't above the world, they were its witnesses and its guides. From this vision, OracleFest was born, a celebration of connection, insight, and the timeless wisdom that flows through us all. Here we gather as oracles to share the visions Spirit whispers to us, to speak of the energy currents flowing through nature and humanity, and to help guide those who seek answers in a world that often feels lost. So grab a seat, breathe in the mountain air, and join us as we begin today's chat. Whether it's an energy reading, a conversation about our craft, our path, or simply sharing a perspective on the world below, this is where we wait for more oracles to join us on the mountain. What wisdom will the mountain bring us today? Let's find out together. Step into this sacred space where the wisdom of the ages converges with the questions of the present. Welcome back to this beautiful Oracle Mountain space. And I'm so blessed to have Jojo here of Jojo Tarot, Joe Smarky with us. I like always giving a bit more of a personal connection introduction, but I feel like it's very natural with Jojo because I've been working with him, and also we've both been a part of the Side Chicks Facebook group for a few years now. So I've seen his posts and liked them, and I always really enjoy speaking to men who do divination practices, because there's a lot of men who do spiritual work, and not all of them get into the divining and receiving these messages. They'll sort of, go into some other lean within spirituality. So I'm very excited to dig in and talk about tarot. I know we're going to get onto a lot of other subjects as well. Both of us have many different directions and stories that will probably come up. So just welcome to this space, Jojo. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Kate, and thank you for inviting me to Oracle Fest this year. We sort of got acquainted about a year ago through Side Chicks, and you're just launching this whole thing. So it's been really cool to see that grow, and it's been really nice to have some support from you and everyone else in that group and other Oracle Fest members as well. Because I had a lot of trepidations entering into this space as a professional. Um, in terms of how I'd be seen around things like gender and stuff like that. So, and everyone's
Yeah.
just been super welcoming, and I really felt comfortable and at home. So,
Yeah, because
thank
it
you for
was like,
that.
of course. Yeah, because it was the Side Chicks group, and so as a non-chick, it's funny to come into that space and be like, "Ooh, are people going to be okay with this?" And yeah, absolutely. I think we need more and more and more and more people online and sharing their skills and their gifts, and so absolutely, 1,000%. And you just do it in such a uniquely you way, and I think sometimes it takes people time to find their style and their voice, but I know you enough to know that a lot of where you approach things from comes also from a really good foundation in like philosophy and different practices and deep inner reflection. Some people, they come online to their gifts and they start offering them right away, and that deep inner reflection kind of happens as the process goes on. But it kind of feels like you were a bit more measured and sort of working with it on a personal level before deciding to offer it out and to share it in a larger way. So I'm just celebrating that this is where you're at right now on your journey and sharing it up and out in a bigger way and helping people with mindset as well, beyond and including the tarot. But I'm curious actually how you got your start in tarot. Like did you have an initial experience? Was it around you when you were younger at all? Like, when did you get introduced to tarot?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, in my story, it's been this sort of lifelong sort of push and pull with it. So it does begin in my childhood and in my adolescence. As a child, I was very much this sort of nerdy kid. So was very into Lord of the Rings and all the fantasy stuff. Did a lot of gaming as a youth and teenager, tabletop gaming like D&D and things like that. Also big tech kind of whiz at the time, being my age. So I had all these various interests. And that really intersected with my upbringing in Catholicism. I grew up on the eastern coast of the United States. My whole family were all Catholic. My parents weren't as strictly Catholic, but I grew up as a child going to church and stuff. I was an altar boy, had first communion and all those things. And I sort of had, so one of sort of the first underpinnings of this awakening for me was an experience I had at around the age of 12 or so. Um, I was at my Catholic catechism on a Wednesday. We're talking about Book of Genesis and the creation myth and all that. And I had just watched a Stephen Hawking documentary because I love science too. And Stephen Hawking is talking about the Big Bang and the idea of the singularity, that all the matter of existence of the universe is all just packed into this infinitesimally dense thing, which then explodes under its own weight, thus creating the Big Bang, creating the universe, creating all of us. And so we're talking about Genesis in our Wednesday catechism, and I suggest to the priest that science says that the singularity is essentially all things, and we're essentially saying in the Bible that God is all things. How is this not the same thing? Like, why is science and religion essentially at odds with itself when we're talking about the same stuff? And he wasn't having it. So, he kind of chased me out. He didn't get real angry, but he was just like, maybe this isn't for you. I was very fortunate because I was in a very progressive area. So, um, I wasn't going to get like beaten on the hand for this or get, a tirade from the priest. But it's like, I don't know that this is the right place for you to be right now. Calls my parents, sends me home. Fortunately, again, they weren't super strict, so I didn't get in any real trouble. I wasn't punished for this, but my parents, again, being very casually Christian and also people who worked in like health field, and so again, acknowledge science as a valid thing. They were like, maybe we'll just have you stop going to church. Like, you're 12, our parents aren't going to really care. It's not up to them anymore. That kind of thing. Um, and so that was like a very formative moment for me because I couldn't grasp like why, again, religion is rejecting science and science is rejecting religion, and why aren't these things the same? It just seemed to me like they're just very much different ways of describing the same phenomenon. And we're all just trying to figure out like essentially our own existence, right? Like why are we here, and why don't we understand what happens when we're not here, right? Like I don't remember not being alive. I don't know what will happen after, and that kind of thing, and at a fairly kind of young age. But I was always a kind of a thinker and also a highly sensitive child. So that led me into that. And then I also grew up again in a very sort of academic area. So I grew up in the western part of Massachusetts. I describe it like it's kind of like if old hippies were hobbits, it would be the Shire. So we have a bunch of colleges there. It's not the most populated area. It's kind of quaint and quiet and wooded, but there is this big confluence of intellect and academia and philosophy there. And I was exposed to all of this as well growing up in that area. So I had all these varying interests. And one day, not long after this happened, maybe a few months later, and again, I'm 12 years old, so I'm heading into adolescence, my teenage years, starting to feel all of that angst, along with things happening in my parents' relationship and all that kind of stuff that comes on, as we head into that part of our lives. I'm struggling with all these things, and I'm wandering around this old used bookshop in town, and I wander up into like the occult, mysticism, new age section. So this would be like around 1992, I'd say, like 94, somewhere early 90s. I'm looking through all the books, and again, I had an interest in fantasy gaming and all that. I always loved the wizard characters. I always wanted to be Gandalf. I was played a
Same.
magic user when I played D&D,
I was like, let me
those
be the
kinds of
mage.
things.
Yeah.
Right, like, you know, um, because I was not the most physical child, the most physically active child. I never thought I would be like this big, strong football player type, but I had this idea. And again, being around all this academia that, like, in this modern world, it was really our intellect that made us powerful in a way.
Mhm.
And so I was fascinated with, like, is magic really real in some sense? Even if it's not exactly how we read about it in a fiction, what is that? Like there's something to that. And I'm wandering around this bookstore and I find a copy of his Magic in Theory and Practice by Aleister Crowley. And your viewers may not know, but Aleister Crowley was one of the great 19th century occultists in the mid to late 1800s, along with Israel Regardie and A.E. Waite himself, creator of sort of the most common modern tarot deck. There's this huge interest in the occult at the time, and these people really work to bring a lot of different sort of systems and ideas of occultism, mostly from the West, together and sort of unify them into this big overarching system. And with that, they developed sort of the system of ceremonial magic, highly ritualized kind of work. Also, we see the modern incarnation of Wicca and witchcraft sort of again also get codified with that at that time. So I find this book by Aleister Crowley. It's like Magic in Theory and Practice. And I knew about Aleister Crowley sort of as this pop figure from modern music. He appears on like the cover of Sergeant Pepper's album. And I knew, for example, I was big into heavy metal. So I knew Led Zeppelin was, and they're supposedly Satanists and all this. But that they were into this stuff. So I pick it up and I start looking through it, and I start thumbing through it, and I'm looking at the rituals, and I'm like, well, there are the pentagrams, and I'm like, all the Wiccans and stuff, I'll practice this. So I'm like, here's this thing, like, and I'm like, this is real in a sense. Like, this is not just some fiction. Like, this isn't written as a fiction. This is something people have actually studied and practiced, and they must have gotten something out of it. Um, and so I very quietly purchased the book with my allowance and kept it hidden and started reading it and studying it. And anyone in this world of this kind of ceremonial magic will tell you, like, that's the worst and hardest way to learn this stuff. Because it's all written in, like, again, it's a very obscure language. At that time, they still had to be very coded about how we were talking about these things. So it was a tricky thing to learn from, but I got a lot of the core ideas from it. And again, there's the overarching idea that, that, like I was saying before, like the microcosm and the macrocosm, we are all just facets of God in a sense, even though we're having these unique experiences. And so the universe as a whole is reflected within us and vice versa, and all these sort of universal concepts. And it just pulled me into all of that and all of that stuff. And so a big part of working in these magical traditions is the idea of divination. Generally, we say that, if you're going to perform any kind of spell or ritual, you want to perform some form of divination first to check in with the universe and yourself. Am I doing the right things? Does it make sense? Is it going to work? That kind of thing.
I didn't realize
And
that that connection was there. I've never heard anyone say that or seen that, but it makes total sense to me that divination would come preceding any efforts and actions and work that you're doing within the magical realm. That's interesting.
yeah, and also with that, and especially in this Western system of magic, the tarot itself and its set of symbols are all mapped into all the other symbolism in it. So this is also the place where I learned that, like, tarot card is like these four suits and these like 22 major arcana, but that all of them also can correspond to, like, there are astrological symbolism. So all of your astrology, your planets, and the signs also map into tarot. And this is the work that Crowley and others did at the time, is they unified all these things. They also, a lot of it is based in, they pulled in a lot of the Kabbalah. So this is the ancient Hebrew mysticism. And so it's all very Judeo-Christian. And in fact, it reflects a lot of the mysticism of the Judeo-Christian traditions, including the New Testament and Christianity. Um, and so it just unified all this stuff. And they also unified, like, they brought all of the older, like, Egyptian and pagan, practices from classical Greece and Roman. So all those gods are all in there too. And they're all just in this big book of correspondences. And you just work with them as you wish. Um, and so that got me into starting to read tarot because I wanted to start performing ritual. Um, and I started dabbling with it. And at the time, I had to still be kind of secretive about it as a teenager. I don't know that my parents were really going to jive with that. As casual as they were about things, we weren't really at a place where we are now. This stuff is just really out in the open. And anywhere in the Western world, we can just discuss it freely on the internet and talk about it and that kind of thing. So I started dabbling in it. And as I headed into my teenage years, it was something I studied a lot. And they also prescribed reading all the great philosophical and religious spiritual texts, from the East and West. So from like the Tao Te Ching and the Vedas to the Bible itself and some of the other, great sort of Western works. It's all in there. Like, read all this stuff, as grounding knowledge in this. So I picked up a lot of it intellectually, and I started to understand it somewhat spiritually. But like many of us, as I went through my teenage years and into my young adulthood, I sort of just got sucked into the mundane world. You're at a place in your life where you have to figure out a career, and I was going into tech. It was kind of already decided for me, um, based on what I had been doing. I started working in like tech support as a teenager. So my practice of it, and that's really where the power of these things comes from, sort of was, here and there, right? And again, you're a teenager and you're in your 20s.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a lot of discipline, even if you have the time. So I got away from a lot of it. And over time, it just became like, I have these books. Someday when I'm old and retired, I'll come back to spirituality like so many people do, and I'll do all this sort of ritualistic work. Um, and I kind of just put it all aside to a large degree. And my life went on. And as I went out into the world and lived through a few tech bubbles and things, I, started having my ups and downs as an adult. And over time, with all the various things that happened in my life and various traumas, I slipped more into struggling with things like anxiety and depression and all the fun sort of human suffering that happens to all of us. Um, and so really for like probably about 20 years of my life, I didn't really practice or think much about any of this stuff. And then flash forward, we can flash forward to I'm about right around 40 years old. And at this point, I've been married 10 years. I found my soulmate during all of this. And she is my best friend and my soulmate. And we're married. We're actually both Gemini. We have the same birthday. So
I
there's
love
this
this.
crazy confluence. Yeah.
Yeah.
And thankfully, like, I never gave up an underlying belief in these ideas. I just didn't engage with them in a way that was actually helpful for me to actually, develop myself and deal with some of my things. So I flash forward again, like 20 years, find myself living in Colorado here with my wife and our three cats and dog, on my fourth career, trying to become an auto mechanic and really struggling with it. And my struggles in that were not really around my ability to fix cars, for example. It was anxiety and depression and trauma. So I kept, I'd done like 2 years of school, got my degree and my certifications. I was really good at car repair and diagnostics, which is a highly technical thing in the modern age. Cars are vastly electrical and complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I go to, I get my first job. I talk my way into like a really good paying mechanics job. And like the first week I'm there, I'm just struggling with like the most basic things,
Mm-hmm.
like losing time and just getting trapped in like worry and anxiety and like, and that's the type of career where you have to move quickly. The way sort of pay and everything works, it's very time management oriented. So you only have so much time to really perform a repair and all that. So I kept struggling and washing out of these jobs. And, people that I was working for just like, I just don't think you have it. Like, you understand it, but like, we don't understand what's going on. And finally, it culminated at my last sort of mechanics job because I never lasted more than a few weeks at any of these places. And I'm sitting there trying to do the most simple thing and just like thread some bolts into this car. And my hand is like shaking. It's like this, like, and I'm like, this is not just, I'm not just nervous about this job. Something is going on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I ended up going home that day. I ended up quitting that job as well. And I was really searching for answers. And a lot of the conventional answers that had been put before me didn't really help. When I started school, I started on an antidepressant because I was feeling quite anxious. Got that through my doctor, and it helped a bit. But I never really pursued that sort of path anymore. So I didn't really try some other antidepressants or other medications. I knew a lot about these things and the effects they have on people. And I've had people in my life who had very serious mental health issues. And at times, those medications certainly help them stabilize and be safe in their own body, at least. But what happens is they put you on these things, and then it's just like, well, you must have a genetic thing. You're a broken human being, and this is how you can live. And your choices are be, raging and insane and a danger to yourself or others, or just basically be chemically sedated, and you are just like a shell of a human being. And you can get to work every day, and you can push the buttons and pay your bills, but like you're not going to reach your potential if you're a creative type of person, an artist. I've seen a lot of artists fall into this, and they would be on their medications, and they're like, I can't create at all. I'm like, this is horrible. And then they'd get into these cycles of going off them and then becoming unstable again. And so I knew that, again, sort of conventional health was not really going to solve this for me in a way that I wanted to live. So I start going down the rabbit holes again, sort of, and I started following some modern Western magicians on YouTube. I'm like, I should get back to doing that. You know, this is a means of self development and healing. It's not just creating wealth in your life, and that's part of it. You can do that, but it is a path of healing. And so I go down that whole rabbit hole. I start watching. There's one sort of magician in particular. His name is Damien Eccles, and he is someone who practices the Western ceremonial traditions. And his story is fascinating. And I kind of remember this being in the news back in the 90s and early 2000s when it was happening, but I kind of forgot about it. So he is someone who, as a teenager, grew up in southeastern United States, I think Mississippi, rural Mississippi. And basically, he's someone who, as a teenager, is very like this goth kid, in the 90s, kind of antisocial and had his own sort of issues. But what happened to him was that he and two of his friends were framed for the brutal murder of a child, and essentially were framed and wrongfully tried and convicted for felony murder. Um, and he was in prison for about 20 years before he was able to get free. And what happened was a scandal erupted around this, and some celebrities at the time took interest in it. HBO or Cinemax did a whole expose on it because it was highly sensationalized. It's like this is right at the end and the height of like the satanic panic that came from 20 years before, really. So, you've got video of this 15 or 17-year-old young man on the stand, like freaking out. And, everyone who's deeply conservative is like, see, that's, it's the devil. Like, this is the whole thing. And they locked him away. And I don't remember if he was given the death penalty or life in prison, but he spent 20 years in jail, 10 of it in solitary confinement. And eventually he was able to get out. They were able to exonerate him. And they still haven't fully exonerated him yet, but they got him out and they dismissed all his charges. 20 years later. And so he credits when he was in prison, even when he was in solitary, he started practicing and studying this stuff. And he will tell you that this is how he got free. He essentially used magic to manifest his own freedom. And that's such a powerful thing, you know. And I'm watching him talk about this, and I'm like, and then I was like, oh yeah, I remember hearing about this, you know, way back then, like 20 years ago. And I was like, wow, this really works. And if he can achieve this with this practice, certainly I can figure out whatever my anxiety, depression, traumas, and things are. And that's when I decided to start reading tarot again, because that's, again, kind of the first piece in a way. Like, you're going to do these rituals, you want to have that bit of divination. So I got a tarot deck and I started practicing again. And very quickly, I came to this realization, like, a lot of what I'm struggling with is like old trauma and just not wanting to engage with my own emotions, all the, you know, harm that causes to yourself when you internalize those things. And that's what brought me back to it. And that was about, at this point, about 3.5 years ago. So it's a long and kind of interesting journey, like in and out of it.
It is, you know, and I'm sort of sitting, absorbing and reflecting on. There's so many aspects of that. I think a lot of people will say, "Oh, I went through that type of shift," or "Oh, I had that kind of experience." And I know for me personally, some of the alignment is also quite obvious. Like I also was like an intellectual, nerdy, geeky. I loved Dungeons and Dragons and these exploratory worlds, right? That there was some sort of not actually escapism, but exploration in what things could be and how things, how people interact with each other as well. And I wanted to mention before I forget, just because it was on my mind, that you mentioned the Kabbalah and Kabbalah mysticism. And actually, one of our speakers is really familiar with that and has a whole Oracle deck centered around this. And she also does like sound and vibration healing. So Annalisa Berg, if anyone is interested in the
Okay.
Kabbalah and getting a little more depth in that, but I also thought, oh, Joe, you're going to like this too. So Annalisa Berg is joining us for OracleFest with some Kabbalah mysticism. I believe she's on the last day of OracleFest because I thought that'd be interesting just to pique our curiosity and have us invited to learn more after the event. But I don't know why, but my brain is stuck on reflecting in some way of that time in your life, that preteen, 12 years old, and this deep inner reflection. And I think maybe because of my own personal experience of, one of my major awakening times and deep deep reflections of religion and existence. And I was raised, Catholic to a certain extent, but then I was in a gifted class and everyone was kind of atheistic and had all these smart parents. So that intellectual community thing, I can resonate with that as well. And they were sort of teasing me for believing in God, right? And they thought that the only reason I wasn't swearing and I wasn't a no gooder, the only reason I wasn't doing rebellious kid things, they thought was because I was scared about God or scared about going to hell. And I was like, I don't think that's what it is, but I really went deep. I was like, is that what's going on? Am I just scared of, and it was a really intensive internal questioning. And I think a lot of sensitive beings go through this. And I also feel like a lot of sensitive beings tend to not be around, like when they're that age, tend to not be around people who take that seriously and have these conversations with them. So I was just thinking about your experience in going to your, was it your priest who you're speaking to? Like the leader of your
Um,
church who,
yeah. In our catechism on Wednesdays, you know,
because
so he was teaching it at the time.
yeah, and he didn't entertain the question, right? And there's something that's like deeply mystifying to me that you would have a belief set, and this is not like just a criticism of him, it's just more of a reflection of kind of, I think, when you're that age, you really are looking for someone to try and understand, and you're asking questions because you're seeking answers. And if they don't have the answer, if they could simply question with you, and like be curious with you, it might have invited you to actually incorporate some elements of, you know, that community or those beliefs. I think obviously the right things happen, so I'm not trying to turn back the clocks or anything, but I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of people where if I tried asking a question, it was kind of like swept away, or it was maybe like, don't be asking too much, you know, and try to follow the unwritten rules of how much you're allowed to share of what you're going through. But to me, our spiritual places ought to be places where we feel like we can go dive deep into those questions and be supported in that questioning, like forever questioning in some way.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon, and this seems to creep up with. It's just I think it's just the intersection of human beings when they get into spaces of sort of spiritual leadership, whether it's in organized religion or more in mysticism, like we are. We get the ego never disappears in all of this, so we have this sense of like I need to have answers for people and lead. Um, and it's just again a very human thing of like we're afraid to show vulnerability or like say that we don't have answers when we're in these positions. And when you study leadership just as a human thing, I mean the most powerful leaders are very much own that, they own their own imperfections and flaws, and that's why they're great leaders, because they certainly have knowledge and strength that people are looking for, but they also have brought people in, so people feel like they're coming along for the ride. Like we're in this together. There's some things we're all going to discover, not just my my flock or my students are going to learn from this, but like it's a two-way street. And that's a very Western attitude, I think. When you look at Eastern thought and their attitudes about philosophy in general and education and stuff, there's much more of that give and take, in those
Yeah,
cultures. So.
I noticed that too. It sort of feels like there is more conversation or something. But when we get into the Western, I guess in the name of progress, we got to decide something enough to just keep moving forward or something like that. We don't spend as much time in the pondering in the middle of the mountain. Yeah, very interesting. And so I'm actually also curious. I really respect divination, obviously. I don't think someone who hosts an event called OracleFest could ever not vibe with the idea of divination. And similarly, when I started understanding more about shamanic cultures, divination's a big part of it, but not every shamanic healer does divination work, and so it's interesting that some people do naturally sort of lean into that. I'm curious what types of questions you first were asking when you were using tarot. Like I know for me, I'm revealing myself first, but I know for me, when I got started with pendulum, I was deciding what to eat for dinner because I was so overwhelmed in making a billion decisions each day. And I too was shifting out of that, the anxiety, the depression, the what am I even doing with my life, these, haunting voices. I was doing so much better because years prior to that, I had, pretty severe panic attack disorder. At this point, I was like, I'm doing pretty well. Why am I so flipping exhausted? Why do I still not trust anything that I'm thinking or doing? And, I can't think straight half the day, because I was so overwhelmed, just constant overwhelm internally. I think I was like a duck with my feet just kicking away under the surface, is probably what it looks like. I probably looked a lot more relaxed than I actually felt. And so I would ask that. I would also ask about romances because I was very much like I cannot trust my own decision making in this realm, and I would ask like, am I meant to keep dating this person? Is this person a good person in my life? I don't want to be hurt, and it was coming from that place of like I don't want to make a bad decision because those bad decisions of who we trust in romance, allows me to be hurt, and I'm not open to that. I'm not willing to experience that at this time. It was like I've had too much. I've had too much hurt. And so it's very like protective type of questions and also very basic decision making kinds of questions. And as I deepened into my journey, I feel like I ask very different questions now than when I first started out. So I'm curious if you remember any of the types of questions you were asking on your early tarot journey.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, as a 12, 13-year-old, et cetera,
Yeah.
like, so a lot of it was around really my own social dysfunction, like,
Right.
why does this person
Like, does
seem to
this
hate
person
me?
like
Or
me?
like,
Yeah.
why, right. Like all that, things that concern you in your adolescent world.
Hmm.
And then along with sometimes some deeper sort of like philosophical questions as well.
Hmm.
Um, so there's a lot of that kind of stuff
Hmm.
creep in. Um, I didn't I understood this intellectually even then, but I didn't fully grasp the power of like the idea that tarot depicts your soul's journey through life and through all of its lifetimes. The major arcana really are like these archetypes of like the evolution of a person. Um, and so when I came back to it as an adult, that was really where my focus was because I'm like dialed in, like I'm trying to solve this problem, trying to move myself forward in life, and like what do I do with that? Where is this all coming from? But yeah, as a youth, it was these kind of things, or I would ask it things like, is magic real? And that kind of thing. I was a highly sensitive and very empathic child. And so I was kind of socially underdeveloped. I had friends, I had some very close knit friends, and we're all kind of in that same sort of vein as people. Um, despite being young boys, we were all kind of more sensitive types. And some of my friends, very intellectual. I have a few friends who literally have like genius level IQs. Um, so again, people who are not grounded in any real sense of religion or spirituality, all very atheistic folks coming from very atheistic families. And like you're talking about, so a lot of those questions would arise, because I mean, someone could just look at me sideways one day for no fault of my own, and I would just be like, "Oh, they hate me," and and like I might never speak to them again. I was very avoidant as a youth and into my adulthood as well. So it was a lot of that, and not eliciting information from people in conversation, but having an interaction and then wondering about it and trying to figure it out after the fact. So there's a lot of that stuff.
So you used it for
And that
like
also
social
plays into like,
confidence, like to get
yeah,
like because you must feel more confident once you would get an answer about, you know, how someone's relating to you or whether to trust them or not or those types of things.
yeah, it did help. I think I would have been even more like recluse and sort of withdrawn. I think,
Yeah, just give up.
yeah. And I'd also use it for creative things. So, in like playing role playing games, I would sometimes pull cards to get inspiration for like
Mhm.
creating characters or driving bits of plot and stuff, which is a whole like wonderful use of any kind of, especially like Oracle and tarot cards is like for creative work as actual like creative inspiration. That's a fun one. Um, and that's an area I hope to sort of teach and provide some guidance on as well sometime in the future. But as an adult, my focus is really on sort of self-awareness and development and manifesting, really like living up to your greatest potential and your really like your divine purpose on the earth. So
Mm, you
yeah,
know,
it's interesting to look back.
yeah, yeah, I really like getting to know more of your story as well because there's lots of pieces that I've learned about you in this time. So I'm just like, oh, I love getting to know Joe more. Um, I'm thinking about this like because you've mentioned the concept of manifesting, and I just have a feeling that you're I mean you're obviously quite well read and studied in that way, and because it's a newer shift for you to go like fully stepping fully into this work. Are there are there things that you feel you could say to someone who's just thinking about pursuing their mission or maybe someone who's struggling to feel clear on what their mission is? I think that happens a lot, and there's a lot of OracleFest attendees who are newer on their journey, and so they're like, oh, I'm definitely spiritual, definitely intuitive, like I'm definitely sensitive, I'm getting messages. Now what am I supposed to be? Who am I? um, are there any things that you could help someone with to like, yeah, what might you say if someone was coming to you and feeling unclear in what that highest mission is, that fuller potential, because it's hard to reach for a full potential when you're not sure what that would look like.
So much of that, like, it's really interesting because we sort of come. really get aligned with our purpose, our divine purpose, by not really trying to define it. And so
Yeah.
this is what happens in a spiritual journey for all of us. I think it's pretty common. We all have a unique experience of this, but it's this common pattern. So, we kind of go through life in sort of default mode, however we were sort of raised and approaching things. And often that's a world very fixated on sort of the material existence. So, I have to earn a living, make this job. I'm defined by my career, my possessions, my relationships, and all those things. And those are all part of you and yourself and your identity. Um, but it always leaves us feeling lacking. And, so we have this thing, something's not right. And we may again sort of explore more conventional things, and you get the answer of like, well, maybe you're depressed, and you just, you're going to go on this antidepressant. Maybe you start taking that, and you're like, yeah, I feel less dread about this, but I don't feel any more purposeful or like,
Mhm.
like I can just continue on now, but I'm just in this sort of like meh state, and like there's something else that I'm not getting here, that kind of thing. And so a lot of, when I first run into people, and I work with people who are in various parts of this journey, but the biggest theme of it is coming back to the idea almost that it is a journey in your experience of it, because we're experiencing time in this linear way, one moment to the next. But it really is just a return to the essence of what you are. And so when you try to start seeking it, it's like trying to find your face without having any kind of mirror, right? If you're just in a room with no mirrors and you're like, where's my face? And you can kind of touch it, but you can never really see it, right? Um, and that's what tarot is. It's a tool that it is essentially a mirror into yourself, because you can't truly see yourself. You can't just roll your eyes in the back of your head and understand yourself. Um, and it's not the only tool for this, but it's the one that I happen to like the most, I think. Um, so that's where we try to start leading people, is because often like someone in that state, they're very excited. They're like, oh, I felt that. I had a moment of feeling like, oh, there is all this potential. And then there's a downer to that of like, but what is it? And then as soon as you realize you don't know what it is, you're like, oh, like here I am failing again. Like I can't
Mhm.
attain this.
Yeah,
And you're
like it
trying
must
to
be
find something in
nothing.
the dark. Right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So you have to give yourself that little beacon of light. Like you kind of have to almost arbitrarily fixate on a direction, even if it doesn't, there's no indication that that's where you're supposed to go. And you have to start going. And as you move into it, then you start to get direction and you keep orienting. So divination really is that beginning piece of that. It gives us that little beacon of light. It's in the tarot, it's the hermit in the clouds holding the lamp, shining light, and you're out in your world looking at it like, oh, there's that little star out there. I'm gonna go that way. That seems promising. And so 90% of like spiritual guidance and this healing work is really just walking alongside with people on the journey, giving them just enough so that they have the courage to take the next step, because they have to actually go into the unknown to find it. I can't give that to you, you know.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what I like about what you've created around the idea of OracleFest, because I love the sort of the visual of the oracle on the mountain. Like that's a wonderful and it's really appealing thing, it's really cool. And the idea that we're on this journey, our experience does feel like a journey. And at times it feels like an uphill walk. But when you get to the top of it, you have a realization that like there was no mountain to climb, that you're really just coming back to yourself. And so that's a big pillar of everything that I teach and help people with, and even just in simple readings, even in very casual readings that just like, I don't know, an event, a party. I do parties and stuff. I don't, I do a lot of deeply spiritual work with this, but in order to pay bills and things, when I got started, I started just doing bars and events and things. And even people who are not in a mode of like, I'm seeking help, I'm seeking clarity, they just sit down for a reading out of like novelty of it. Like, oh, this is cool. Very quickly we get to a place where we're like, God, my whole life, it's been this. And like, yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Um, and that's just pulled me more and more into again, sort of this healing healing work, and sharing that as a tool with people. So I love the
Absolutely.
idea of the inner oracle. You really speak to that. And I think that's important because in our space, in the new age and spiritual worlds, we can get wrapped up in like, I'm not, it's not the right modality. I have to find the next thing. I haven't found the right teacher. I haven't found the right this, the right that. It's important to explore all of these different things. And if it feels cool to you and it's exciting, like get into it. But give it some due time, really explore the depth of whatever it is, whether it's tarot or meditation or whatever the practice or thought or ideas are. Um, but don't get too attached to it because that becomes its own trap. We
Absolutely.
talk about spiritual bypassing and
Mhm.
the trap of like, I haven't improved myself enough. I haven't gotten there. And it's like, that's not what journey is about. This is about understanding that what you are is already perfect. And you just have to get out of the way and let that shine through. And your purpose
Absolutely.
will become apparent in that. So,
So it's kind of like your highest potential, living out that highest potential is really more like consistently returning to what feels most like you in some kind of way without attaching to it the identity of you. I often like I often like the idea. I sort of joke that I feel like I am everything, and people are like, oh gosh, she's conceited, But when I say I'm everything, I really love the idea also that no one will ever know the true full depth of me, not even myself. Like that is a constantly unfolding and never ending and exciting journey in that, because I honestly kind of get bored when I know the answers. And when, this is actually why I had to be put in a different class when I was young, because I would sit there, answer the things, and be like, tap, tap, tap. Okay, what do I do? Now what? And I think we get like that in life. And so when we're in that stagnant point, but we're feeling like there's something more, it's really like more of ourselves and what would feel more like ourselves, again, with not a super firm attachment to what self or identities we've had in the past. It's like rip it all apart, find the new things if you like. But then there is that trap of people shifting from one thing to another, thinking they've never found it, they've never found the one. But really, our whole lives are this constant unfolding of all the different layers and aspects of how we've come to be, right? Like we can see from your story, your life story, like how many different parts of your experiences have led you exactly to where you are. And I think that's true of all people. Like, I look at OracleFest and the Oracle Mountain vision that came for me. And it still teaches me things I'm going to say almost every day, but I had a conversation just yesterday because I was switching from the last place that I was at, pet sitting, into this new place where I'll be doing all the Oracle Fest stuff. And the pet sitting owner, she was listening and asking about this work and what it looks like. And, you know, she said, wow, it really seems like you're, what did she say? She said, it seems like you're chasing, like you're following this like boulder down the hill or something, right? Like that it's like I'm running after this really big thing and it's like, woohoo, we're so excited. And the only fear is if I'm going to tumble as I go, or if I'm going to keep up with my legs as they jet forward to try and like follow this momentum like a snowball rolling down, a snowy mountain, literally mountain, the Oracle Mountain. And I laughed because I thought, oh my gosh, you know what I keep seeing this as? I've kept seeing this as me pushing a boulder up the mountain, because holy, is it a lot of work? And oh man, it's a big vision and I want to hold it and I want to keep it moving, right? And so it blew my mind because I was like, that's exactly what it is. It is like, she's like, no, it sounds like you've put in a lot of work and you've already tipped it over. You've tipped it over the mountain. You've seen the views and now you're like, you're chasing it with excitement. And it was yeah, a lovely reflection. I'm blessed that Oracle Mountain came and found me, because it is a really good metaphor. And it is always so funny that the feeling you have at the top is like, oh yeah, I know this place. Oh, I belong here. Oh, this is like a welcome. That's what I want. I want everyone to feel welcome, because I've always felt that from Oracle Mountain, that it was a place I belonged. And I feel like all of us do. And we make our way up and down. It's not like we stay there. We make our way up and down, and we learn different things on the way up and the way down every time. Yeah, it's very sweet, and it does actually make me think of like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and all these, places that I would go to in imagination land. And yeah, it feels like it never ends, and that the more we embrace the idea that it never ends, the easier it is to enjoy ourselves on the journey. And often that's the struggle that people are having. It's like resistant to accepting and enjoying what this looks like while embracing change and growth and progress. I'm curious, you're welcome to speak to any of that stuff too, but I'm curious, something that you are manifesting, if you feel like called to share. Is there anything that you are like open to or manifesting? This year feels like so much momentum, and I've been talking with the other speakers. It feels like there's a lot of energy. We're going to be able to get more traction. I've been watching some of your YouTube videos, and I know you've been saying the same, like, this is it. This is where you can actually see your efforts pay off. So, what is it you're focusing on? What is it you're looking to do? So, yeah, is there anything you're manifesting at this moment?
Well, the biggest thing I'm trying to put forward right now is I'm trying to increase like the depth of my work with people. So like I said, I do a lot of tarot readings for people. Um, some of them are in more casual settings, and some of them really are like people are coming to me to really get some clarity on something. And in a lot of my readings, I find myself slipping more into essentially having the sort of conversation we were just having, talking about this journey. So I've just started to launch, offer one-on-one transformational guidance or coaching. I'm not the biggest fan of that word, coaching.
Yeah,
It
no,
feels
no.
too like, athletic, and I was not a jock growing up, so I have a little bit of that. Um,
I didn't even
but
think about that. That's really funny.
yeah, we throw that around
Put me in,
now,
coach.
and
Yeah.
yeah. And as someone who certainly was very much wrapped up in sports fandom too for a lot of my younger life, I just kind of react to it that way. But providing some guidance, and it's really about just sort of holding space and walking the path with people.
Hmm.
I can give you the map and I can be like, well, I've been in those woods over there and they look scary, but I went and I came back and something good happened. There's something really good in those dark woods. And I can kind of go along with you, but I can't truly walk the path for you. So that's a lot of what I'm manifesting this year is starting to offer that guidance and sign some clients on for that. And just generally getting my story and my word out to a bigger audience too. So I've been expanding a lot in the online space this year, as you well know. Our audience will start to see more and more of that, which is why I was so excited to get invited to Oracle Fest this
I was
year
gonna
because
say, then yeah, then I'm so glad that OracleFest found you. You found it, and we're here. And you'll be sharing more about learning how to read tarot. So people who are looking for more information from Jojo and to see more of his, we have this workshop where Anna Froelich and Adrienne Amari and Joe will all be together, and each sharing a different perspective about how to read Oracle and tarot, and all these things. And I certainly think that the invitation with tarot is not to get readings on end forever, but actually to adopt some understanding in a deeper way and to work with these tools in a more lived kind of way as well. I know that's when things expand for me, is when I actually take that next step and dive a little deeper into it. And so thank you for doing this work and for helping more people tune into that inner oracle, and really more inner oracles coming online and people trusting themselves, to me leads to a better world where we value community and intuition and receptivity, and we value connection, because connections is what we're making when we're doing these deep reflections as well. And we value ancient wisdom, and yeah, all these practices mean so much. So just thank you for the work that you're bringing to the world.
oh, you're welcome. I'm really excited to see what the other speakers are going to bring. I do know a few of them, so I have a general idea. But
Mm-hmm.
um, the biggest message with all of this in the context of the workshop is like I want this to be accessible to people. So many people take a casual sort of beginning interest in tarot or these other types of practices, but especially tarot. and they get their tarot deck and they get their little pamphlet and they're like, there's 78 cards. I can't memorize all this. This is just work. Like, I don't want to go to school. I don't want to take another test. And they get really hung up on that idea. Like, I can't memorize all this stuff. And especially in today's society where we are just so starved for time, for focus and attention and reflection. And people's attention spans are so short that, I think there's a lot of people who can benefit from their own practice of tarot, and they're just not engaging with it because they're convinced themselves they can't learn it or use it effectively. Now, I've studied so much of the underlying symbolism and bits of metaphysics that are attached with tarot, like I said. So there's so many other sort of areas of study that relate to it. You can study numerology, you can study astrology, and you can use all that in tarot. There's so many deep layers to it, but my biggest goal with this is to really get people to just start looking at cards and using them as a simple tool to check in with themselves and connect to that inner oracle. I don't, these barriers that people have with this are more self-constructed. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to memorize the cards. And, there's some really great techniques that you can learn, techniques that I picked up when I got back to doing it 3 years ago that really helped me start using it quickly. Because at that point, I was like, I need to actually use this and put it into practice. I can't spend another year relearning and brushing up on all my meanings. And I need some help here. And so I found some guidance from some online tarot channels about reading more intuitively, really just sort of looking at the imagery and checking in immediately with like, what are the first things that you feel and think out of that? Kind of like a Rorschach test in a way, the old ink blot, kind of things. Like, what is your first reaction? So we're going to bring some of that to the workshop, and
Love
all of
that.
the curriculum that I'm developing as well is sort of based in that. And then you can go from there. As you do it more, it becomes a language, and you speak it and you know it. And you do it long enough, and you get to a place where you literally think in tarot. Just like if you learn another language, like Spanish, if you're an English speaker, eventually you kind of can think in Spanish, right?
Mhm.
And I go through every day, and I'll see some crazy thing going on, and I'm like, oh, that's the tower, or like
Yeah.
I see two people and they're having their issues, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's they're having their like Ten of Swords moment. Like there's a
Right.
betrayal there, and like right, or whatever it is, and it's its own language. It's a language, it really is. It's a
Absolutely.
very useful and practical language. So
I love that. I love that. Yeah, and I mean I love anything that uses also archetypes and emotional states in order to help people relate because I do think these are yeah, tried, tested, true, time honored traditions, all of them. And I really just wanted to like kind of leave on this note of it really feels like actually most of our barriers are self-inflicted, self-created, these limiting beliefs, and so to know that your work is about helping people learn tarot but also deepen so that they can address that actually is that's really important work to do in this world because I see that with hypnotherapy and subconscious work that like really so much of it is made up and we know it. And then how do we get around it? And it's with tools and tools like tarot, right? And like a whole bunch of other things that are going to be at this OracleFest. And that's the whole point. So we have over 40 speakers. I'm so excited that you are looking forward to being there and learning from some of the other speakers as well, because I also think our learning on this journey is never complete. And so I get a huge activation receiving these 4 days. I mean, can you imagine 4 days of all of these amazing speakers? I go through a really deep rebirth. So the Phoenix Rising theme of this year is really going to take hold in me. I can already sense it. I'm really excited for what's going to come in your year, in all of our years, and for people to follow along and continue staying tuned with your journey. So I'll link your stuff below. This is going to be on YouTube, so I'll definitely link your YouTube and things so people can follow, subscribe, and like if they resonate with Jojo and what he has to share in this world. And I think this world is better for your offerings being in it. So thank you. And thank you for being on Oracle Mountain. Anything else you want to add before we depart?
no, I want to thank you for the opportunity, and it's been so great to watch this thing grow. I it was about, like we said, we met about a year ago through the online space, and I had just started to sort of put my tarot reading into the online space. And so, thank you for all of your support. I remember doing like some live readings and then like my first ones and being
I
very
was like,
nervous. And
hey,
you were like, I want one. And I'm like, no, like,
not Kate.
here's
Yeah.
Kate. Like, yeah, like like I've watched some of your stuff and you're launching Oracle Fest. And like, she's like light years beyond. Like, I can't.
Not.
I used to get very nervous about reading for other readers in the beginning
Oh,
because of that kind of thing, that sort of inferiority idea. But you and everyone else in our space has just been so welcoming. So I thank you so much for that.
absolutely. It touches my heart, makes me giggle also because it's so ridiculous to think of that now. But I appreciate that. That's very sweet. Okay, well, until next time, back on Oracle Mountain, we'll see you at the big Oracle Fest.
Okay, we'll see you then, Kate. Thank you.